wants to come up when you're ready, that's absolutely fine. And join me. I'm not going to do this solo. I think, look, one of the things to spike your adrenaline while we wait for everyone to get up here, looking at everything we've discussed today and the report that everyone's put all the work into, my view is still very much for the data clean room is a luxury at present. There's still a lot of work to be done. Civic Data did a report recently of the top 20 spenders last year for the IAB 2022, and there was only one of those that had a consent management platform in place, and it wasn't set up properly. So if you've not even got that part in order yet, and the consent and understanding of what tags are being delivered to your page, what data you're collecting with those JavaScript tags, that data clean room piece is quite far off. It's something you need to look into, but there's so much homework still to be done that we're seeing, and that's what we're here to talk about now. So I think everyone could see where everyone's from here. So I think I'll just dive in, and when I give you the questions, just explain your roles, and then we'll go from there, if that's all right. So Maritz, when you answer this question, you can give the explanation of who you are and what you do. But as an industry, we regularly discuss the importance of building trust with Australians and the consumer value exchange. What is this, and why is it so important?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I'm from Audience 360. Audience is in the name, so obviously this privacy legislation is pretty important to us. Value exchange, I'll start with that. And look, it's one of those things that kind of, I don't know, riles me up beneath this veneer of a German, very calm. There's a lot of fire about this because it's something that we do quite poorly as an industry. I think me explaining to my friends what I do, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have the same experience, struggle to understand how much value we actually bring to the economy. But not only that, and might make a bit of a bold statement, but I think we pay for the internet. We pay for a lot of services that people just think are free. People expect that they're free. Journalism, obviously The Guardian was up. A lot of journalism wouldn't survive without advertising. So maybe we don't pay for it, but we definitely facilitate a free internet. And I think that is the value exchange that we need to communicate really strongly as an industry as well. I guess the importance of communicating that is if we don't, we end up here. And it was kind of raised by the last panel a little bit as well around the government. It doesn't seem like the government's actually taken the time to understand our industry. It doesn't seem like they've taken us serious. I mean, I love the IAB submission. I think there's been some really good submission that I've seen already. But to me, I think we're too integral to small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, for the government not to have reached out to us prior. And so I think that, you know, that value exchange, that communication is really important to the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things I did notice in the report itself when we put our submission forward was there's a lot of Australian homegrown businesses here. I think I mentioned it at the Programmatic Summit as well. If you look at Woolies X, who are just around the corner here, that's paid for by baked beans pretty much. But when you look at the Google Pair launch, the partners are American businesses, where money is being spent through American businesses on an American business. So I quite like the idea of what you're saying there. But also, if you look at Danny, his business is from Australia as well, and Marco's business from Australia. I think that's a key thing that's been lacking, is if there are Australian rules being put in place, how do they actually help Australian businesses rather than kind of give me to the American businesses? So Sarah, coming on to yourself, if you don't mind, if you look at, and my daughter watches Bluey consistently, but you'll see a pre-roll for Doogie. There's no adverts, obviously, for me on the ABC, but my daughter definitely knows it's an advert. So you have your own stack of technologies at the ABC. Is it working?
I don't know, is it? Yes, okay,
yes.
cool.
So if you want to just explain your role at the ABC, and then I'll say this with regards to some of the potential changes that are coming, from an ABC perspective, are there any proposals that you believe are essentially baked in?
Yes, okay, so my role at the ABC is I am a privacy officer, but I'm also the privacy champion. So that's largely about kind of strategy and culture. Just on the ABC position in terms of privacy, we have a little extra layer of regulation for federal government agencies because of the Privacy Code. So there's actually a lot of proposals that are coming through that are already obligations for us. So I can see the benefit of that. Things like having a record of your personal information holdings, we already have to do that. So the other thing about ABC and privacy is that trust is really important to us as the national broadcaster. We need people to trust in our journalism. So we're not going to take privacy risks and risk that. So there's already been a lot of work at ABC around privacy. We already have preferences around things like targeted advertising and things like that. However, also lots of work to do to make sure that we're compliant with the proposed new regulations, but also that we're not just meeting those regulations, we're doing things in alignment with what our audience expect from us and what aligns to our values. So first of all, I hope you're all getting really into data governance. It's really important that you understand what you have, where you got it from, who's accountable for it. The proposed change to the definition of personal information, for me it's more of a clarification rather than a large change. Maybe I've been quite conservative in my approach in the past, but it's also not a very useful definition. So different types of personal information have different levels of risks, and you need to layer over that what you're using it for. So having a record of what you have at the moment in your business, what you use it for, who's accountable, will mean that no matter what regulation is introduced, you'll be able to quite efficiently layer that on to what you do at the moment. Changes other than that fair and reasonable test, I think it will come in some form. Again, that's something we do at the moment at ABC. We don't just meet the base compliance. A good thing to be doing right now is a lot of training and awareness of how to apply that test. We don't really need to wait for the regulation to learn how to do that. That's already part of every data ethics framework. So if you look to those principles, they all talk about fairness. Other than that, definitely some things around children's information. I quite like that there's kind of more prescriptive things coming in around that, because at the moment it's you know, that you can assume someone can give consent over 16 and so on, but it's not very clear the protections that need to be applied. The issue there is if you're not prescriptive, then the good players will do it well and the others just won't. So ABC, you know, children's audience is obviously really, really important to us. And we've looked at the codes that have come in other jurisdictions, and we feel that they're very appropriate, and that'll be reflected here.
Got it? And I think you'll probably be under much more scrutiny than a lot of other people, being who you are as well.
Well, we are at the moment already, so used to that.
So, Marco, despite being an Australian business, your accent's not going to really state that. You've got a bunch of different clients that you work with around data collaboration, and everyone who probably knows your background also knows that you've worked at a lot of areas around ad operations and publisher work as well. What are you seeing as a key topic at the moment in regards to your conversations with those publishers in terms of consumer privacy obligations, but does this also result in expectations having to be managed somewhat?
Well, there's a bit of difference in topics, depends on the market. So in States, there's a bit different topics we need to cover. But for the purpose of this panel, locally, it's mainly about the privacy. It's mainly about how do I get ready for the changes? What do I need to do? What's going to happen with my data assets and all of these other things? Now, what I like to say, the change is already here. So Safari already removed the cookies. So future is here. It's not like it's going to happen in a year from now. It's happening already. And browsers are just helping us enforce and embrace the change. So they're just doing it for us. And I think there's a bit of panic when we think about all this stuff, as you all agree, and we heard from other panel members. And we are not the first, not the last industry that goes through those changes. Think about the cars, for example. They had to move from petrol to EVs. They were thinking about the same thing. They were thinking about the panic and what's going to create and what's going to happen with the whole industry. So the same thing is happening with us here. So we need to think about how do we embrace the privacy, how do we move to first-party data, and ideally even zero-party data. How do we give control back to the consumer? So the topics we normally cover, we need less PII data. We don't need to collect more PII data. We need to try to keep the web anonymous as much as we can. And when we collect the PII data, make sure you control it. Make sure your vendors give you the control, legally control of those identifiers. If you do that stuff, you're going to be privacy compliant. And those are the topics we normally cover. This can be done, and there were a couple of other things we covered from the data clean rooms and everything else. Yeah, pushing PII data in there. We are just basically going to give reason for bad malicious parties to go and breach into those systems. This is another topic we cover. So imagine a data breach in data clean room. Imagine a data breach in any sort of data partnerships. You don't want to be there. So we need to find a way to exchange this data in an anonymous way. Those are the topics we cover. That's actually what we're trying to build as well, to try to build a way of exchanging the data, doing those data partnerships in a more anonymous way where consumer is protected. And at the end, we also try to cover the way of how can we do that stuff. So luckily to us, as I said, future is already here. So we can already experiment. We know what's going to come. We know that we need to move to first-party data. Now, the next step is how do we enable this stuff and how do we enable the consumer to opt out? There's no issue with somebody going to a publisher website and having an informed consent. You know that they're going to track you. That's okay. There's a fundamental problem of that data going in 50 different parties. And that's what we need to solve. We need to solve the data ownership. From a technology perspective and from the legislation perspective, that's where we need to go together. And as I said, topics are mainly, there's a lot of concerns about data breaches. So they're going to be more prominent if we have more PII data. So there's going to be more reasons to have a data breach. The second thing is like, how is this impacting me? It's already impacting you. If you look at the Safari, it depends on the market. It could be 50%, could be 20%. Can this be done in an anonymous way? Yes, it can. We've proven that stuff. We've proven that data can be exchanged in an anonymous way. It can improve the conversions. And we've also proven the fact that this can all work with giving the control back to the publisher and just giving up on that notion that we need to control the data in the ecosystem. We don't. It's all about the first-party relationship between the consumer and the property they're visiting.
All right. Sarah, I saw you raise your eyes several times. Don't know if anyone else saw that. So looking at practical terms in regards to what we've seen from the report, discussions I've had in market is there are definitely two very distinct groups. There are those on one side who will make a lot of money from very confusing privacy laws and problematic privacy laws, so consultants training people, etc. And there's the digital rights advocates, etc., rightly so. Then on the other side, if we look at what Gabe was saying earlier on about PwC report and the GDP that comes from this industry, and if you consider where we talk today about advertising, there's a whole other part of the industry around the content management system, where if you're using PI to change that message, if you look at personalization tools, any kind of marketing technology, all of that is also impacted by this. So there is no middle ground from the report that I've seen. So in practical sense, do you think we're any kind of way to getting somewhere?
Look, I think we're in a process where, you know, we need to have the discussions with government and we need to have a proper consultation process to really iron out all of the issues. Listening to what everyone said, what Erin's comment earlier and what the panel was talking about, I think there are really three key themes that we need to get across to government because, as you said, you know, that we're seeing these things as two separate things, but actually privacy and the health of the digital economy are really two sides of the same coin in terms of they are both critically important for consumer welfare. And so we really need to get that message across. This is really about, you know, how do we change the laws to make sure that neither side of that coin is detrimental. Secondly, I think we also need to get the message across that, you know, the Privacy Act should regulate privacy harms. But if we're going into sort of advertising harms more broadly or consumer law issues more broadly, then there's a real risk regulating those issues under privacy law, because we'll end up regulating activities that, as we've discussed here today, are actually quite beneficial to the industry and to consumers as well. So that's really important to keep in mind. And thirdly, what has also been discussed already, the way forward really needs to, the Privacy Act needs to incentivise all of the, what we were talking about today in terms of privacy enhancing technologies, consumer consent platforms, things that will really help us to protect personal information in an online world. So I think we need to make sure that however we frame the law, that those things are incentivised and not sort of inadvertently disincentivised because we've scoped the law too broadly. So they're all messages that we need to make sure we get across in this process, and that's part of the process. So we'll hopefully be talking to government about that pretty soon as per the submissions.
Great. Maritz, can there be true data collaboration without that genuine transparency and that education piece?
Yeah, I mean, simple answer is no, right? There can't be any real collaboration without transparency, but I'm going to try and riff on it without getting in trouble. I guess there's really two sides of kind of that collaboration piece, and there's a technology collaboration, which I've seen, you know, a lot of talks today and a lot of pieces of work that's actually really privacy forward. And I know everyone on every panel has said it, we believe in privacy, everyone believes in privacy, but that technology isn't coming to the forefront. And I would say as an industry, we have to be honest with ourselves, and we've kind of done this to ourselves in many ways, you know. There's all this talk that historically I've seen over the years of, you know, let's say location targeting, of cell phone tower triangulation to harvesting location data in the back of taxis, and quite problematic kind of sets that now are coming up, and consumers think that that's what this industry is. And it's not, you know, I mean, there's a handful of companies that actually would have this data to have this kind of hyperlocal targeting, and I guess we can all Google who those would be. Not saying that they do, but they have the data. And I guess this is kind of where we need to kind of go beyond this kind of conversation of not just the technical, and I think it was put really eloquently before around this isn't just the solutions that we have from a technical perspective, but we need to go actively and collaborate transparently as an industry to have conversations with consumers. And to steal something that Jonas said the other day that I absolutely love is that privacy is not a USP. What I'd hate to see is businesses going away from this today, walking away going, we can gain privacy for a competitive advantage down the road. We can gain privacy to, you know, make our business make more money than another business, because that's not the intent of this. And what I'd love to see is actually this community, the whole media industry coming together and actively working together, because, you know, this is bigger than one business. This impacts so many parts of our economy, of our industry, and an industry that obviously I'm getting quite worked up. I'm quite passionate about, and I think that has so many good talents inside of it. So I guess no, and the call to action really is, let's collaborate transparently. Let's work together. Let's throw our support behind, you know, IB initiatives. Let's work together with businesses that traditionally are competitors, but let's collaborate in a data clean way, not sharing any company secrets, but to advance that course of privacy, which is absolutely important. So I don't know, do I rap as well? It's kind of like, if you had one shot, one opportunity, would you capture it? Is that what we're doing today?
Let me try something freestyle. No, not really, but hands up who's heard of GPC? So that immediately says we've got a problem here. So when we talked earlier on about the data transparency standards around the consent attached to data, is that data you should be using, and so on. GPC is a subset of what the data transparency label is doing with the IAB Tech Lab, but GPC is also baked into a lot of the major browsers, apart from some, but it's basically the global privacy control that will ensure that they will honour that opt-out if you've previously opted out before. So again, if you look at that report I mentioned earlier on of the top 20 digital spenders, not one of those digital spenders also honoured GPC either. So that transparency piece is part of that.
And can I just add, I mean, the data transparency label has been something that I've worked on ever since I looked like in that photo. It's been a while, and we haven't seen the uptake that I think it deserves in this market, and I think that's a really important thing to point out. There is something there that would give consumers trust, a very simple tool, but we just haven't seen the uptake on it, and I think now is the absolute necessity for all of us to have another look at this and actually go all in on it.
So
I'll wear a data transparency label t-shirt next time.
are you all down with GPC? All right, Sarah, obviously, given that there's a whole bunch of tech that you would be using, and data collaboration is part of that, and we discussed the other day about even referrer data, where a lot of people forget about this part of a lot of ad operations and trafficking. You can attach that referrer piece of information to then act on to personalize the content on the landing destination site or segment. That comes under this part as well. What are you looking for in regards to partners when you're looking at data collaboration? What kind of areas are you looking into? What are you looking for? That kind of stuff.
So I used to be a criminal lawyer, so I don't really trust everyone to do the right thing. So obviously you want to look at what do we actually need to share. So data minimization, and that can also include a lot of obfuscation or different types of technologies for matching and so on. Then you need to have your contractual controls. There's a lot of legal tick boxes and technical security tick boxes. If you're a supplier, I recommend that you have that ready to go, because if you haven't been doing lots of privacy questionnaires already, you'll be doing a lot more. And there's going to be a lot of scrutiny from anyone who wants to work with you around this. I recommend not lying in those assessments. It causes a massive trust issue. And so then what we're looking for is assurance that they are actually going to do what they say they will do and not do other things. Some indicators around that that might make me look a little bit closer is, for example, if we're using a particular service that you offer, but you also have a customer data product, I wouldn't necessarily just trust your word that you're not going to pop it over there. Trust is really important. Being upfront. For all of Meta's faults, they are very open about the fact that the information we give them, they will use it for pretty much whatever they want after that, in certain circumstances. And can't remember, reputation. So even if we are not passing information to you, if you use personal information in other ways, for example, we use Samsung ads, but we don't pass the ABC audience data to them, I'm still going to look at your privacy practices because we want to know what could possibly go wrong and whether we're comfortable with being associated with that organisation. We'll also look into your past in terms of data breaches and things like that, how you handle those things. What are you saying about what you do publicly versus what I know that you do privately? So, yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah, a lot of interrogation, but it's obviously it's a risk-based approach. So we don't do this with everyone to that extent. But if there is that privacy risk there, then we have to.
But I will state, and I think everyone here may agree with this, you're almost a unicorn where, having worked at Woolworths previously in your previous job and your background in law, your knowledge of AdTech, MarTech and everything else is very rare. The biggest challenge is, and I was at a meeting with a very large enterprise business earlier this week, where the in-house legal counsel was in the room because they were confused about what's happening and what is considered a tracker, what's not. So in businesses where they're trying to get up to speed with this, quite often the in-house legal counsel, because they do not know the answer or how things work, they will actually nix an entire project. And you may have all seen this already, where the dotted line that you had before that you could work up towards with personal data has been pushed back even further. And budgets have been put on hold since the report came out and so on because of that lack of unicorns. So the ABC are very lucky to have you in that respect.
Thanks. So what I would recommend in that situation is try to educate your legal team on a lot of the basics. Treat them like their first year,
Or at least know their name is useful.
first year media buyers, because even the way the law is written at the moment, pretty much no one's complying with APP 8, but that's not necessarily an issue. And that's very hard to communicate to legal teams.
That's why I asked what tort was as well. All right, Marco, scrap that question. We were talking about cookies, right? So one of my bugbears is a lot of people talk about cookieless marketing, and there's a lot of confusion around deprecation of third-party cookies, but the fact that actually people don't realize JavaScript tags from third parties can still collect data that's been set up to pass to those third parties, regardless of setting a cookie ID. And that cookie ID client side, and I'm not going to get too technical, creates an issue because it does also still set a limited profile as well. So can you give us some kind of background on that, just to clear up for everyone here, around how cookies still are an integral part of this conversation as well?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So there's a bit of misconception of cookieless. It's not cookieless. You can still set cookies. You just can't set third-party cookies. JavaScript can set a cookie. You can still do some limited tracking. It's normally only 7 days. If you're unlucky on Safari, it could be even shorter. So cookies are still there. The only transition here that's happening, you're kind of moving from third-party to first-party cookies. The only way to have a persistent way of tracking your consumers is having a server-side first-party cookie, meaning it's actually better for all of us. It helps us, again, steer towards this innovation and thinking about everything is about the first-party data. Everything is going to become a first-party cookie. But it's not cookieless in sense, because cookieless would mean you can't set any cookie. You can set cookies. You can set cookies, and you will be able to set cookies. So you don't need to have a cookieless solution as such that we talk about. You just need to think about first-party data solution that can set first-party cookies. Now, the issue here, obviously tracking, attribution, and everything else. The moment when you land on a browser without the third-party cookies, you probably can't attribute that cookie, or you can't even track that campaign efficiency because Safari is limiting cookies. And this is the future we're talking about. This is happening already. It's been there for a long time. So it's kind of flying blind. You don't know what's happening with the campaigns. You don't know what the attribution is. So finding a way of actually converting that into a first party, which means if both advertiser and publisher have a first party cookie, attribution works. Again, we've proven this stuff. It works. It's just about that first party relationship. So it's not cookieless. I wouldn't call it cookieless. I would just call it first party approach. So, and again, just to revert back, I think Moritz mentioned something. I'm also very passionate about the privacy. This is all about us being responsible and having social responsibility of innovating. A natural tendency is we want to do things in the same way we did it so far. It's simpler. It doesn't require any work. Let's reinvent the third-party cookies. Let's do stuff that we are doing so far. Imagine humanity, where would we be if we stop innovation? So in our industry, we have a chance to do a big, major shift. And it's not going to hurt us that much if we work together. If we figure out how to do this stuff properly, we're going to be able to innovate and leave something behind that's going to be much better. We all acknowledge it's not good. We all acknowledge we are where we are because of the third-party cookies and what happened and how they were being misused. And this notion and this whole thing that's happening at the moment just helps us go around and find a better way. Obviously, there's no single solution that's going to solve everything. That's why we need to work together. But think about the first-party data. Think about cookies are going to exist. We're not going to be in a cookieless world. We just need to change the way that we think about the privacy, change the way that we think about the collection, change the way that we think about the ownership. One other thing I want to mention from the previous discussions in the panel, when we talked about the encryption, the way that the consumer is going to trust us, give them the encryption key. So if we really want to make them to trust us, when they give us the information, they need to own the key. There needs to be a couple of keys involved here: publisher, advertiser, and consumer. Consumer needs to be the zero-party data. They need to be capable of saying yes or no to anybody. And that's how I see the cookieless, not cookieless, that's how I see the first-party data future. So misconception about cookieless, yeah, it's definitely there. We hear it a lot, we hear it every day. People talk about cookieless AI predictive algorithms and not using any cookies, fingerprinting and other stuff. So no, I think the path moving forward is first-party cookie, first-party data.
Right, Sarah. How are we doing for time, JJ? What's
We're over by a little bit. But
All right. Well, Sarah, do you want to give? Great. So, next 12 to 18 months. I know we kind of talked about it earlier on, and timelines and everything else. But having heard everyone today, what do you reckon everyone here should start to focus on over the next 12 to 18 months, in order of priority, with a chronological timeline?
Well, look, in addition to what we have already talked about, I think what would be good for industry to sort of start thinking about is, you know, we've heard a lot about the technologies. Obviously, technologies have introduced a lot of privacy risks, but we've also heard a lot today about how technologies can be used to also address those risks. I think we need to start thinking about, you know, do we need some minimum industry standards on the tech side around the privacy by design principles, the PETs, and how we use those and how we use data. So that's probably one thing. Do we need minimum industry standards in terms of the technology? Secondly, I saw a stat the other day on consent fatigue, essentially that if every consumer or if the average consumer read every privacy policy that was, you know, sent to them, that it would take them 76 days every year. So, so that's, you know, clearly consumers are not keeping up, and consent fatigue is real. So I think the other thing that we need to start thinking about is around, do we need we've seen that, you mentioned already, the sort of consent management platforms that have been introduced in other jurisdictions. Do we need an Australian version of that? Do we need to start working on something there as an industry? So I think that's the other thing. And I guess, well, so I did the opposite of what you said. But I guess the top priority also is just coming back to what's already been discussed, what Moritz mentioned as well, really communicating our value and what the industry does to consumers and to government is a real focus for the immediate future.
I think it'd be responsible also for businesses to educate their clients. Like, if I'm a publisher, educating the brands as well on all of this would be extremely important, and each publisher would have their own kind of view on it, obviously. But I think if you're taking money from a brand, you can also put a bit of money towards educating so that they're aware of it as well.
Yeah.
All right. Questions? Did anything come up?
no, not specifically. I was actually just trying to find a service that I use all the time. So you look at the different, to Marco's point, the different browsers, web-based and iOS in terms of the Windows and all the rest of it, because they do vary. So look out for that. But that's great advice around first-party cookies. But there is a variance between the timings in the different browsers that do change, and there was a recent change that was quite significant. It's not a question, is it? Who's got a question for our wonderful panel before I go off on tangents?
I've got a question.
Oh, good.
Oh, there is a question?
You can have this back.
Run like you're on a TV show.
I know. How about that? I'll fall flat on my face.
Hi, thank you. This is Stefania from News Corp, Head of Data Technology. Just actually two questions. One is business side and one is from a consumer perspective. Business side, the recommendations that have been sent to the government, do they include any sort of tiered approach? Similar to, we talked a lot about GDPR and European regulations. They implemented their broad regulations, but then now they are kind of like creating, like there is the DSA now, that has created like the big block of very large online platforms, and there is regulations just for them, right? For Google, Alibaba, Amazon. Is there anything in the recommendations that is just like, you know, more regulations for the big ones and mid tiers and small? And I'm just gonna quickly mention the second questions from a consumer standpoint, like if I am a family member, a mom, or whatever. We talked a lot about value exchange for consumers. I've seen Instagram has launched in this market, is testing the blue tick, where people can provide personal information and pay premium service to Instagram. In exchange, they get a validation boost. They get more. It's not about the content that they receive, but it's about the boost that they get, like more engagements from people. Is that ethical? So we talked a lot about privacy. What about the ethics and the morality behind the value exchange, and who is looking at that? Thank you.
Good.
Who wants that one?
Well, on the first one, so the privacy reforms, like most of the privacy reforms, are across the board, across the economy. So everything that we highlighted today will apply to everybody. There are other, there are other government organisations looking at competition issues, and that's kind of separate. I think there is a, I haven't focused on this one as much, but there is a code proposed which I think which may apply to some platforms and not others, but really most of the reforms are going to apply across the economy.
I'll give it a crack. Okay. There's a few different types of value you can get from that exchange. One of them would be a great experience on a website where it's personalised for your needs. At the moment, data privacy and security is a friction in that process. We need to balance that benefit and the potential privacy harms so that that value exchange makes sense. And if the benefit doesn't balance or outweigh the potential harms, we shouldn't be doing it full stop, and that's kind of the fair and reasonable test. And then if it's something that some people might like and others might not, that's when you are asking for consent or preference.
I mean, in some ways, businesses are just seeking authentication from humans to provide the free service, and that in itself there's some value exchange there for the streaming services you get.
So my question is, how can you get involved with the Data Council if you're not already involved? Maybe you could answer that one as well.
Well, as co-chair,
Yeah.
you can speak to Mr. Brinkworth, or you can speak to myself, or any of
Rashida.
us.
So if anyone would like to get involved in all these wonderful projects we're working on, such as standardisation and everything else, definitely reach out to Rashida or myself or Jonas.
Have you considered a career in sales? Only teasing. So there is one question on scalability. I was going to kind of come to Marco with this one, because there is a section, we do include information in the handbook on this. I know I'm going to plug it, of course I am. But it's a good point. Like, what are the practical implications on reducing scalability for marketing generally, and what are the considerations there from a product perspective?
Well, we don't necessarily need to reduce the scalability. We kind of need to change the way that we activate the audiences, right? If we're talking about that sort of scalability, we need to think about typical programmatic activity. You would go into DSP, use third-party providers, and then pretty much target everybody. Whereas we are now talking about using first-party data to activate. You can still create a segment. You can ingest that segment into the DSP. It's just a different way of doing things. Yes, we can argue it might be less efficient to a degree, but I would actually say it might be more efficient. It's going to cause more conversions. It's going to cause more quality inventory, because coming back to a couple of questions, it's all about that value exchange. And the more we know about the consumer, the better relevancy we can give from both perspective of the advertising and everything else, which means the better quality of data is going to lead to better, reduce the cost of acquisition and better conversions. So not necessarily scalability. I don't see it as a big problem, to be honest.
Quality goes up.
I just want to address the thing about the ethics. So you can do it ethically or you can do it not ethically. Ethics is all about potential harms and trade-offs. And so in order to do it ethically, you need to understand what could potentially go wrong and then put things in place that would adequately address it. Does that answer it? Maybe.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was a